something, she introduced me to this app that created some kind of crazy dance. And I'm still like shaking. I'm so embarrassed.
Oh, I see Jason's getting on. A crazy dance.
Oh, it was funny. It's this app that makes you look all crazy. It was funny.
I can't hear anyone.
Okay. Might be your speaker, Lisa.
Can you guys hear?
We can hear you. Yes.
I can't.
Audio.
Put it on your speakers.
Is that Lisa talking? Is that who can't hear? I can text her.
I am here, but I'm gonna stop my video and my also mute myself because I got little man here.
No problem, girl.
Hey, Blair.
Hey,
How are you?
what's up? Good. I have not made my video for Jess yet, but I did hear you talking about that.
Oh, it was terrible.
So,
It was terrible. And she was so proud of herself. She was so proud of herself. And I'm like, oh, although I am going to force my kids to do it.
yeah, I know. I was like, when the sun's coming out, so I'm like, Brian are going to go outside and make one of ourselves and send it to them. We'll see how it turns out. I'm sure everyone will be seeing them today or tomorrow.
I'm pretty sure that they will.
Hey, hey, hey.
Hey, Jason.
How is everybody?
Fantastic.
Getting good.
Kaylin, there's
Second
Waldo.
Zoom. I'm back to back. Just got done with one.
Awesome.
Oh, you've been Zooming, huh?
Yeah, been Zooming. My butt hurts. I told you that I fell on it that day. It is killing me. Sitting on this hard chair.
Oh, the things we learn.
Well, it's 1 o'clock, so let's get started so we can be on time. Can everybody see the Pricing Bootcamp Part 1 screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Now I want to give you guys some quick Zoom instructions if anybody's new and using their phone, especially for iPhone users, to gain access to the chat option where we have some material I'm about to attach. You'll click on more with the ellipsis and then click on chat to gain access to that chat. Another thing about iPhones and Zoom is if you swipe, you should be able to get different seeing options, so you can get a collaborative view and see everybody, or you can just see certain people. For Android users, to gain access to the chat option where we have the material attached, you will click on participants and then chats to see and access the chat from this meeting. And you can also swipe screens on an Android to see the different views of everyone. So another thing I want to say is I'll try my best. I do have the chat open and I'll try to do my best going through the material to check that sporadically. If you guys post questions there, feel free to do so. And before we kick off, I'm going to try to attach the workbook and the examples that we're using. Can somebody in the chat see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect.
I don't see a work.
No, I don't see it.
It'll be under share screen.
Mm-hmm.
Where is
That.
It'll
Oh.
be within the chat.
in the chat? Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So
Can you hear Jesse?
now that we got those posted, if somebody doesn't have them, please just message me or let me know. But let's kick off some Pricing Bootcamp Part 1. I'm super excited to see everybody. This is awesome. I hope everybody's doing okay out there.
This is such a cool program. Are you recording this
Yes.
too?
Yes, and I will post it as well.
Awesome. That's neat.
Okay, so Pricing Bootcamp Part 1. So your success as a listing agent has everything to do with your value proposition. So to determine what constitutes value in the eyes of a seller, the only thing that a seller is concerned about is obviously the sale of their home. So thus, it's safe to say that we can assemble plans and strategies that lead to homes being sold, you will be providing tremendous value and be in great demand doing that. So the real question becomes, what causes homes to sell? So homes sell for two reasons: price and exposure. And since exposing properties to buyers doesn't do sellers any good if the homes are inappropriately priced, your ability to appropriately price homes becomes even more valuable than your ability to market or expose them. So our 7-step pricing strategy that we use and teach here in this class is the most appropriate price entry point for the home. So arriving at that appropriate price entry point requires understanding of pricing fundamentals well beyond the commonly used average price per foot of similar homes sold. So if you're willing to invest the time, energy, and effort required to assemble and understand the complete pricing strategy taught here, then you'll be above other typical agents and you'll be able to set yourself apart from the competition. Does that make sense?
So Kaylin knows what we do, what Jason and I are capable of doing all the time, but a lot of you might not. We interrupt her, and so it's different on Zoom, but apparently I can still just interrupt her, which is cool. A page,
You can mute you though.
like this, a page like this is what that means to me is that, for years and years, I was taught that a real estate agent prices property, but this class teaches it differently. The way they lay it out allows the seller to self-discover, which is so awesome. It takes the responsibility off the agents, solely off the agent's back, and it makes it more like a team.
Right.
Hey, the other thing I want to touch on, Jeff, is, one of the things we talk about in every one of these classes is that there's no way that you can walk away from one of these classes and have it down. The whole goal of this whole program is mastery. And so we really want to encourage you guys to, once we walk away from here, that's where the real work starts. This class, I felt like, as we've taught this class lots of times, is one of the hardest classes to teach. But it's also one of the most important, kind of exactly what Jeff said, especially in our market. We feel like this is one of the things that really sets agents apart. You see it all the time. Even appraisers struggle to price properties. Agents struggle to price properties. So there's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to price a home right. And what you're going to find out is this class takes that pressure off of you and allows the people to self-discover. It's an unbelievable tool if you'll utilize it. It does not come without a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but I promise you, it'll be one of the better tools that you walk away with from one of these classes. But it's mastery. So.
Thanks, guys. So let's start with checking your attitude. So mind your mind. This is all about getting on the right channel or in the right mindset. So for those of you who have not been to the Momentum classes before, there are core beliefs within every single class that we teach. These are some here that I do want to address. I won't go through all of them because, as you guys can see, you can read through them as well. But there are some important ones in regards to this class that I do want to touch on. So the first one being number 4. There's a difference between value, price, and entry. So we're going to talk about the value of a home, the price for a home, and the entry point for a home. But can anyone tell me how these are found?
Through comps, right?
Through comps. So value is from historical data. Price is from addressing the seller's needs, and then the entry point comes from the competition. And we'll get into more depth on what that means when we go through the strategy. Number 13, there are opportunity costs associated with taking overpriced listings. Does anyone know what the opportunity cost associated with taking overpriced listings is?
Waste your time.
Waste your time. That's a good one.
Yeah, and you may be outside of what a whole pool of people are looking at, the range they're looking at. They may not even see your property because it's overpriced.
Absolutely, Ron. There's also the possibility of kind of developing a bad reputation if you house a lot of listings that are inappropriately priced. That could somehow make agents feel a little less confident. It could lean into like a spiraling effect too. So just keep that in mind, that there are opportunity costs associated with overpriced listings. The next one, homes sell for 2 reasons. Can anyone tell me what those 2 reasons are again?
Exposure and price.
Exposure. Absolutely. Thank you. And then number 19, what's put in motion stays in motion. Why is this a belief, do you think? So, what?
That's the thought that people have to put it in motion. They think it's going to happen that way.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I'm not seeing you either. I don't know what's wrong.
I'm not
that
sure what.
that speaker's kind of muffled, I think.
Yeah, Josie, I'm
I don't-
having a hard time hearing you, but I'll say it. So what's put in motion stays in motion is a belief, because addressing the point of pricing high and coming down, which can hurt sellers, versus pricing correctly at the beginning. That's kind of what put in motion stays in motion means.
Once you start lowering a property, oftentimes you continue to have to drop it to actually lower than what you would have if you would have priced it correctly in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So looking through these beliefs, we want to keep in mind that we want to have these in our tool belt and in the back of our mind. And then also you want to kind of think about how these beliefs make you a better pricing advisor or a consultant. And these beliefs also give you something to fall back on when having pricing conversations. And you'll see more of how the dialogue, especially in part 2, kind of ties these beliefs into talking points as well with your sellers. So keep these in mind. Like I said, they're also in every class that we teach, and some of them can be very similar. So Tracy said in chat, motivation moves. That's so right, Tracy. So right. So then we're going to move into becoming a pricing strategist. So your ability to price a home is not in question. What's in question is your ability and willingness to lead sellers down a path of self-discovery that ends with them taking ownership of the correct price entry point. So what we want to remember is that sellers are the decision makers and you are the consultant. So agents fail to effectively advise sellers on appropriate price entry points. How do you feel right now looking at your pricing strategy that you're currently using? Do you feel like you all lead, your sellers down a path of self-discovery right now?
I'll tell you, Kaylin, I've gotten better. I've had a meeting with Jeff, and I've been through this class once before. I've gotten better, and as a matter of fact, the last listing I just had signed, they understand that if we're not moving, we're gonna, that they're at the top end of where I think we should be. I don't think it's out of the ballpark, but we're at the top end, and they understand if we're not moving, or if it's not moving, we're gonna move down, and I don't like that, because what stays in motion or starts in motion stays in motion.
Mm-hmm.
It does. You're right. Ron, I was taught for lots and lots of years that the realtor is the one who prices it, and that creates such a bad position to be in, because the market moves, people's motivation come in, and you can start a relationship on the wrong foot. We deal with different people down here than the second home market. So I think the point where there you go, Tracy, the seller needs to think it's their idea. Exactly. One of the best parts of this class is that the seller becomes part of it. And that self-discovery of where they enter the market and what that means to them and what that's going to create puts you on the same team, rather than, you're the agent, you price it. And I just love that about this class.
Absolutely. So now we're going to kind of switch gears and talk about how your ability to price a home Oh, sorry, that was same cut. So now we're going to get into talking about like why agents are kind of failing with their current pricing strategy. Typically because they lack some knowledge, maybe some confidence, maybe not using the best judgment when having those conversations, or simply they're just not caring. So to address some points to these on the slide here is, how do we avoid having a lack of knowledge? That's coming to classes, right? That's thinking about this particular interaction, remaining learning based, and trying to get more tools in your tool belt as far as developing and keeping those tools that you currently have going and working on those. And then how do you avoid having a lack of confidence? Well, that's self-reflecting every day, working on some of your conversational weaknesses. And you have to remember to avoid a presentation stance and working on building a win-win relationship with clients. So that shows how your value proposition can really leverage yourself. And then how to avoid a lack of judgments. That shows how your value proposition, remember that when you take an overpriced listing, that behaviorally communicates sometimes that you believe that listing will sell at that price. So that could lead to a bad reputation. Again, some of those things that we were talking about in those core belief sections. Instead, utilizing your judgments to be the best agent you can be, not an agent that is just going to beat out the competition, is a better approach to have. And then lastly, how to avoid lack of care issues. If you spend time building those win-win relationships and serving your clients, this also gives you the opportunity for referrals. And if your clients are losing within their listings, then so are you, and so is your business. Does that make sense? So we're going to look at more of an effective way. So sellers will trust and follow what you can logically and tangibly explain. That's a belief that was in our belief list. And it's better to tell sellers or have them self-discover. Yeah, self-discovery is absolutely key, like Jeff was saying. So what is the best way to lead sellers to the most appropriate price entry point? That's changing their perspective by providing a unique and logical improving pricing strategy that we're going to give you here in just a few minutes. So this monologue versus dialogue screen really just breaks down the difference between a presentation and a conversation. So can anybody tell me the difference between a presentation and a conversation?
The presentation, you're not allowing the client to put their input in, where the conversation, you're discussing it together.
Perfect.
Their opinions.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So in a presentation, there's usually one person talking, but in a conversation, there's two or more people talking, and it's typically more effective. And having an effective conversation with a specific purpose or intent leads to a better outcome with your sellers and for your business. Again, it's all about that self-discovery. And then we get into a unique versus typical. This is really just for you guys to be either a unique agent or a typical agent. So having a strategy within your business and systems and processes allows you to bring your value and your abilities to the table and stand out against some other typical agents. The more you focus on your unique and logical approach, having a pricing strategy, for example, the better outcomes that you will have also implementing a strategy like this.
You know, one of the things I love about this class, Kaylin and everybody, is just the dialogue that it gives you, the phrases, kind of those. It really, when you talk about being atypical, just the fact of using something as you're communicating with sellers, you have a 7-step pricing strategy. That in itself differentiates yourself from 99% of the real estate agents out there that you're going to be competing with. I mean, if you can walk into a conversation and, hey, and somebody asks you something and you respond with saying, you know what, we're going to get to that. I've got a 7-step pricing strategy. That's how we're going to come up with your price, as opposed to just spewing out what it's worth. That in itself gives some value to you and makes you look different, makes you seem like you're more professional. So it's for sure a better effective way.
Absolutely. And the bottom line too, for you to have successful listing conversations, you must be aware of when to walk away also. We live in a world of abundance, and Jeff He does a really great job explaining kind of what that means. So does Jason. But Jeff, can you explain how our market is unique with this specific topic of saying no to relationships that like aren't win-win relationships?
Well, sure. I mean, it's very important that we're confident enough to have that belief that we do live in a world of abundance, because you know it immediately when you visit with someone that is not going to be realistic either in their pricing, or maybe it doesn't have that much to do with pricing, but rather they're going to be they don't recognize any value in what you're having to offer. They're going to be unrealistic with their terms, or with the commission that they're going to agree to. And it's just very important to set a relationship up right off the bat, that it has to be a win-win, because I only have so much time. We only have so much time, but it's so often the agent doesn't focus on that. They are not living in a world of abundance, so they're fearful and they have to take every deal, and it ends up costing them much more in the end, because they're working with somebody who's not nice, who's unrealistic, who takes more time. If they could have eliminated them, they would have had time for 2 or 3 realistic people. So it is very important. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So next we're going to analyze your current approach. So most listing agents, and thus most sellers, believe pricing a home is simply accomplished by multiplying average price per foot by square footage of a subject home. But the reason this practice is widely accepted and massively implemented is because it's easy, convenient, and can be calculated with very little information and effort. Since price is the key component to selling a home, it deserves to be intensely studied. That is, you must consider all things that can and should be considered. So it gives you this "do you currently consider" option. So I want you to think about your current listing approach and answer these questions. Did anyone answer no to any of these questions?
Yeah, I did.
You did? That's okay.
I know when we first started teaching this, I had never done expireds or withdrawals.
Exactly.
We're going to get into some really powerful, he's going to give you some words to use as it relates to expireds and withdrawals. So I think it's one of the most powerful tools that you can use, and I had never used them until we started teaching this class.
Jason, whenever they talked about current approach, to me, it takes me back to how I started out, and I would venture to say that the majority of realtors still do it this way, and that is, you develop the pricing based upon whatever methods you're using, most of the time outside of the seller's part of the conversation, and it turns into a presentation, not a conversation, and you end up delivering that price to the seller. And not only is it worth questioning these things, but it's worth questioning that approach, because even if you use the right methods, if you don't change it from a presentation to a conversation, you stand the chance of being put in a bad place, because the market moves. It goes up and it goes down, and we can't control what the competition does if the competition comes in and changes the game. So it's not just about the fact that we consider all these things, although after we explain it, they're awesome tools.
Mm-hmm.
I can just barely see the corner of your head, little. I just see.
Sorry, I'm trying to hide.
Why are you trying to hide?
I'm eating a sandwich.
So remember that when the message is the same, how the message is delivered becomes the key point of differentiation. So the 7-step strategy addresses these questions, and we are about to see how. So
You know, the other one, just before we leave that real quick, the other thing that I had not done a great job on is thinking about the seller's timing needs and how much that affects price and especially entry, where we're actually going to enter the market at, because it's a huge, that can be a huge, it can allow you to price something a little higher as long as their expectations and
Well,
needs are being met.
you're so right. I mean, how wild is it in what the seller's needs are in a want, not a need market?
Yep.
I mean, lots of our sellers don't have to sell. They might want to.
I think sometimes the hard part is when the seller's financial needs don't line up with their timing need. They may they may need 250,000 out of it, and they need to sell it quick, and the market's only bearing 100 or 199. I do have a real quick question also, Jeff. When you said when you were talking about pricing and you were talking about a realistic price, how do you determine what's realistic? And let me give you an example of what happened to me. I went to take a listing at a patio home in Porto Chima. The home, when I pulled comparables, was the only thing I could find was close to 180. And I explained that to them, and they needed 240 out of it. So apparently after our conversation, it didn't sit well with them, and they called another agent. The other agent took the listing and sold it for 239.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was thinking to myself, that's an unrealistic goal. I mean, that's $50,000 over.
Yeah.
So what do you define as realistic?
Okay, so first of all, I bet you that everybody on here has experienced that, and that the reason that, the one of the reasons, in my opinion, that this is so important is because our market is so challenging, because I have been off $50,000 one way or the other, just like you're describing, and I can't hardly explain it. So the nice thing about this concept is that it gives you the ability to show them a low and a high based upon what you see, and then work with them based upon their timing and their needs and the uniqueness of the property. In fact, we're going to do a little bit of a exercise in here, and we'll deal with some of that, and we'll all be able to talk about it together, because that is, a realistic price is a baited statement. That is really hard in our market because it has there's too many variables. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
We're going to get into that. And I think I tell people, and this is kind of brass when I say it, but I say it to set the other agents up that I might be competing against. I say to them, I don't believe that there is a realtor or an appraiser anywhere at Lake of the Ozarks that can walk in and tell you exactly what your property is worth. In fact, if anybody does come in and they give you a number, that's when your red flag should pop up. And so I kind of set anybody up that comes out with a number that they need to be looking at them, because it's hard to determine an exact number. And we'll talk about that more, Brian. I'm not trying to avoid it, but it's dependent upon a lot of variables.
Yeah, and I think that also goes to leading them to the conversation at that point and realizing that you're not the one that's setting the price. It's really them.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we're getting into at the next slide, is that there is an art and science to pricing in our pricing strategy. So the art is leading those sellers down to the most appropriate price entry point, letting them self-discover. But the science is also assembling and interpreting and supplying relevant facts and data, or creating those pricing tools in general, which Jason had said at the beginning of this class can be the most challenging part of the whole strategy, is because it is the most time consuming and it does take a little bit of work, but it is worth it in the end when you have all that information in your tool belt. So some important definitions. Why do we want to go over these definitions? Well, because they are important to a pricing strategy. So I want you to think about these in terms of your pricing strategy. So leadership, it is your job to be the consultant and the educator to your sellers on their property. So you have to maintain a leadership position. You must act like a leader and you must demonstrate that. Opinion's another great definition because the higher opinion is usually the one that wins, right? So this just shows how the importance of having tools and making your opinion be the valid one through those tools and self-discovery. And then we transition into value, remembering that past buyers have historical data to go off of and to show why buyers and sellers are saying yes and what maybe they're saying no to, and distributing that value in front of your sellers. Entry point is also important because this is based on what the competition is doing. So looking at a lot of active properties within the market, and then also list price, where the sellers think that they can fall based on the information that you've provided for them. So look at that note. Wouldn't you all agree that that's pretty active? The only way to change sellers' perception is to involve them in the pricing process?
Absolutely.
Tracy, I like your comment. It's like creating a math word problem and show them how it works. Yes, that's exactly right. That's so cool. So the golden rule is the list price must be less than or equal to the property's value. So if the list price exceeds value, the seller needs and or wants are being used to justify the price. This will not work because buyers don't care what sellers' needs are. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
And then just some pricing fundamentals. As real estate agents or real estate consultants, it's your fiduciary duty to help sellers assemble the plans and strategies that, when implemented and held accountable, will result in the satisfaction of their needs. So sellers' needs will not be satisfied until the home sells. That's what their needs are. So what are you all doing to address your sellers' needs right now? How are you identifying their needs to begin with? Our listing conversion course teaches ways to identify all of your sellers' needs ahead of time before we even get into a pricing strategy. So that's a good reason to come to that class as well. And we teach it before we usually teach this class.
Well, needs are only going to be found out by asking questions. You know, it goes back to, you know, stay curious. I love that. Jane always says, stay curious. The best answer to a question is a great question. So just remember to ask questions, continue to ask questions. It goes back to not having all the answers, but leading them. And it goes back to that word on the second page of leadership. And leadership is not telling someone what to do. It's leading them to where you think you want them to go, or where the right place to go is. And you do that by asking questions.
And I've heard a lot of people say that the listing presentation is the most nerve-wracking, but if you're leading them, then you know the question, but you also know the answer. So in a way that takes stress off the listing agent during the presentation.
And Kaylin, you said I agree, Brian, totally. But Kaylin, you said something, how are you doing this today? And communication is my answer. I mean, in times of, you know, first of all, motivation changes, needs change. And so whatever they say day one may change, you know, at the end of the first week or the end of the third month. So I think we have to be aware of that and constantly looking for that. We talk about it, how it can come up. I mean, a defensive conversation with a seller probably means that something different changed on their end that we need to address. But to answer the question of what are we doing today, I think it's communicating even when we don't have much activity. We're just there to ask how they're doing and tell them what we know. And lots of times that'll flush out a good conversation, and they'll be more honest about their needs.
Absolutely.
Jeff, I think even being real specific when you're having those conversations of asking them, have your needs changed?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I have a situation I'm dealing with where it seems that the seller has an excuse every time an objection comes up to, you know,
Come down real quick and we can make it quick.
on it. He's got an excuse, like there's a neighbor that has a do not trespassing sign. He sent me a message this morning. I know that father, potential buyer, he said, so maybe somebody could take it down. I said, I can't take it down. I said, you need to discuss that with your neighbor, but he keeps making excuses for the pricing issue. And now he thinks it's because of a trespassing sign. And he's very sensitive to any type of comments.
Sorry, I thought somebody else was trying to speak. No, I think that that's a great example, Lisa. And I know that you're not the only agent that's been dealing with that particular example. So I hope that some of these tools and this strategy will help, and we'll keep getting into ways around that. But to continue with some pricing fundamentals, as a result of thorough analysis, you'll be equipped with pricing knowledge well beyond that of the seller. The great thing about possessing this superior knowledge is not that you can give the answers, but rather that you can ask great questions, like Jason was saying, which in turn leads sellers down that path of self-discovery. I even coach our agents in our training classes that even if they get stuck or may not even know the answer, that they can resort back to asking questions as well. And that's important, to keep asking questions until you gain an understanding, but also so they can see that you're gaining that understanding as well. There's a fundamental difference between you knowing the correct price entry point and sellers accepting it. So sellers control pricing decisions. So just because you know how to calculate an appropriate price entry point doesn't mean that your listing will sell. The only way your listing will sell is if the sellers follow your logical and take complete ownership of the appropriate price entry point. And that's how we're going to do this, is we're going to dive into how they do that and get into the proven price strategy right here. So the 7 steps, it's 7 steps for this pricing strategy. It supports a relationship-based approach. So the truth of this approach is if you don't value a collaborative approach, you won't value the 7 steps of the pricing strategy. And this allows you to quickly become a pricing expert in any neighborhood area because it requires you to analyze all the data ahead of time before you step into having the conversation. So you're going to be well equipped before you sit down with your clients, just approaching a strategy like this. Also remember that these strategies have been tested and have been developed for over 15 years. So other agents have done this, and that's why we love to share it, because it is a proven and tested advantage. So here are the 7 steps for the pricing strategy. So step 1, and we're going to dive deeper into these in just a minute, but step 1, you're going to identify and gain an understanding of the value ranges that exist in the neighborhood or area. Step 2, you're going to test that logic using expired listings. Step 3, you're going to determine the value range most suited for the subject home after you have tested that. Step 4, strategically position the subject home within the value range. Step 5, verify the price position chosen satisfies the seller's financial needs. Step 6, you're going to analyze all homes directly competing with the subject home. And then step 7, you're going to determine the most appropriate price entry point with your sellers based on their timing needs. So we're going to dive in deeper to each one of those steps right now. The 7-step pricing strategy will not reveal a different or price than a typical CMA, but it will, however, allow sellers the better opportunity to self-discover because they'll be able to see more information. The most appropriate end price, which results in fewer objections and more of that win-win relationship. And adopting and mastering these 7 steps will take a little bit more time and energy on your part. So just remember that it is a little time consuming before you start the process. So step 1, you're going to identify and gain an understanding of the value ranges that exist in the neighborhood area. So you're going to do this with developing those ranges like we were talking about. So you're going to have a high range, a low range, and a mid range. And by the way, the Excel spreadsheet that I shared within the chat, they have the templates for each one with the ranges in there that you guys can practice with. So what typically drives property to ranges? Does anybody know? It's features, the property's features. So we have this in Excel sheet too within the chat. Like I
And-
said, be sure to check that out.
Kaylin, can I ask a question about that one?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Actually, go on. I was going to jump ahead. So you've got some of that. I'll
Yeah.
talk about it here.
Okay. So you will create your first CMA with sold information. That's part of step 1. So looking at the neighborhood data as examples here, but please feel free to expand on these examples too. You don't have to have each one of these, and they could, coincide with a specific property and specific features. So please feel free to expand or not use some of them depending on the property that.
Okay, now is where I got to ask my question.
Okay.
What creates a neighborhood with respect to Lake of the Ozarks? Anybody?
That's a great question.
Because you're going on a listing. We're talking about pricing a property. What defines their neighborhood? Or what are some different things that define? I got lake frontage. Correct. Totally correct. Anybody else? Anything else?
Water view.
Topography. There's another one.
Somebody said view.
View. Yeah, that's a great one. How about property type in itself? I mean, some of these location, yeah, water depth. I mean, there's a ton of them here, and that's why we're tasked with things that other markets don't even think about.
Absolutely.
So when they talk about neighborhood in this class, to me, it means so much more than that. Amenities, for sure. It starts with the property type. Am I talking about a second tier home that has no access? Am I talking about a second tier home that has lots of full-time residents, and by the way, they have a slip, a lakefront home, a condominium? I mean, we could go right down the list. Each one of them has their own little set of what that neighborhood means, that discounts comps and that includes comps, or that requires us to go further, or stay closer. It is a big, long list.
The other thing, Jeff, is that there's no exact, I wish there was a guide that said, oh, well, if it's got this much lakefront, then it's worth this much more. If it's got this topography, it's worth 20% more, but there's not.
Back to Brian's deal, Jason.
Yeah.
Brian, your deal was the same way. I mean,
Right.
It's a challenge.
It is.
So notice that this will give you the opportunity to identify some feature patterns with your sellers, and that way that they can start self-discovering what those features and how those features start driving where their property is going to fall. Again, this first step is doing the sold information. So you're going to pull sold information through MLS.
Can I ask a quick question, real quick on the CMA?
Yeah.
Does anyone else look at, like, for example, in a condo, if it's in personal properties included?
Yeah.
When they do the CMA?
Absolutely.
I do.
What I've run into is that, okay, so I come in and I show examples of expired listings or sold listings, and then the owner, especially in condos, the owner immediately says, oh, I've seen that unit, it stinks, their furniture's not as nice as ours, they're this, and it's all personal property that they're comparing, not the actual property itself. So what's everybody's approach on that?
It's a great question. Does anybody have any answer?
Well, I guess I'm not in this boat myself.
I'm waiting for Whittle. He's got an opinion about everything, Brian. I was waiting.
He's done eating, so he's got to be saying something.
Brian, I think you can use it to your advantage either way. I think you can make an argument both ways. Obviously, not that I've done it in a while, but I always would take personal property into account, especially if it's nicer. I mean, if you're comparing the exact same two units and one comes with personal property and one doesn't, obviously the way that again, it's not an exact science, because if one's decorated really nice and one's not,
Yeah, one's updated,
what's
one's
the
not.
value there?
Yeah.
we know that personal property doesn't carry the same value that our sellers want it to often.
Right.
A lot of times it carries more value than we want our buyers that want it to. So
Right.
again, I don't know that there's an exact answer for that, other than the fact that I think it's something you should look at and consider. And they may be in there, and they may have legitimate concerns about why theirs is better, and some of them may be realistic, some of them may not be. And again, telling them that the other unit is better usually doesn't work. Usually asking them questions to try to
Right.
get them to self-discover.
That's the key, Jason. I think it's hard to get them to self-discover you, and that's where Kaylin said earlier, this takes some work, but it's time well spent. And I think for years I didn't give credit to personal property and the way that property shows like I should have. I mean, in the last year or two, we have seen specific examples of where staging and the way a property looks, specific examples of it, taking a property from the bottom of the pack to the middle of the pack to the top of the pack,
Yeah.
causing an expired property that was out there for a long time, and one agent lost that and another agent listed it, had some work done, and it sold. So I mean, I think there's real value to it. It's hard because we saw the chats. I mean, lenders won't lend on it. That's a true statement.
Like Kelly said, to remind people that personal property isn't included, but helps picture the space.
But I mean, I think again, it has something to do with our market. In a lot of property types, the people that are buying here, they don't want to deal with it. They want to
Right.
walk in and be able to use that thing, and they want it to look a certain way. And if it looks it and it has what they need, they'll pay for it. So, I think it's worthwhile to consider for sure.
I had another agent tell me from another office that what he does is he assigns a value to everything. So if it has furnishings in it, doesn't matter if they're great furnishings, terrible furnishings, they get a number. A boat slip, whatever size it is, it has a certain number. If it has a lift, it has a certain number. And then you subtract all that out of it to come up with a price per square foot. And you do that with all of your comps. Does anyone else do that?
I wish I could agree.
Oh, I was
that.
actually waiting to jump in on this. Sorry, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
No, so I just pulled comps for a property that I was talking with Jeff about earlier, actually. And one of the higher end comps didn't have as much land, but it sold fully furnished and it had been updated recently.
Mm-hmm.
As far as personal property goes, we all know that doesn't add value to the property, but as far as negotiations go, that helps for the buyer, that is.
Yeah.
Using personal property as a reference, I only use that when I'm pulling sold comps. I don't use it for like expireds or anything. I only use that for sold comps. That's all I really had to say on it.
I think it's really hard, Brian, to reduce it to an exact science, because I just don't think we can. So I've never bought into it being something we can come up with an exact plus or minus range. It's amazing how a great looking property that shows well and is furnished well, it's just amazing how the appraisals end up on those, because they usually don't have an issue.
Yeah.
So there's
Okay.
a lot of factors.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good questions. So now we're going to get into step 2. It's the same as step 1. You did sold information for step 1, except this time you're going to gather data with expired information. I know everybody kind of fluctuates with pulling this information for expireds, but here is why we urge the expireds as part of the process. And that's because expireds give the sellers the information of what others have said no to. This also can be a great leveraging point to show sellers what happens when they do price wrong. And Jeff explains how doing this within his team really has leveraged his listing conversations. I know Jason touched on it too. A lot of agents, when we teach this class, are like, whoa, we don't do expireds. What do you mean? But there are a lot of leveraging points with having this a part of your pricing strategy.
I just love being able to show people what homes the market rejected.
Mm-hmm.
I just love that language. It really brings it makes it very real to the agents or to the homeowners when you can demonstrate that.
It's a powerful word. That's that word I was alluding to earlier, is rejected. If you will use that in your conversation, it'll get their attention.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the same procedure as the sold sheets as well. Utilize the information that will be applicable to your property in the same Excel sheet, because I know our market, like Jeff was saying, is so vast with information. Be sure to pick and choose kind of what you want in that expired sheet. And then determining value ranges. So expired listings represent the consequences of inappropriate pricing. Most homes expire because they were either listed in the wrong range or incorrectly positioned within the right range. After reviewing the expired summary sheet, this should be obvious. Pay close attention to homes that expired and then sold later too. Remember that doing this also allows you to eliminate objections as well. Step 3, determine the value range most suited for the subject home. So now that you're confident with the value ranges for the expired and solds, identify the range most suited for the subject home. This is based solely on the features of the subject home. So you're going to take that property based off of how you've pulled information. You're going to try to place it within what range you feel is best suited. Same with step 4. You're going to just look at those continuing search points and figure out where the correct position is. And you're going to do these beforehand and also with your sellers as well, so they can self-discover. A good practice is to incorporate here is to also print out and highlight and write on some MLS sheets. This shows that you are listening to the seller's needs and also identifying any amenities and conditions that they're looking for. And then your step 5, you're going to verify the price position that satisfies the seller's financial needs. So why do we uncover needs again? So that we can identify pricing and what the sellers are wanting. So asking the sellers, if we price here doesn't meet your needs, can be a great opportunity to keep them on the path of that self-discovery. And then remember also that price has to be less than or equal to its value. So the keynote, most typical agents stop at step 5. They don't go any further. Any questions so far? Cool. Step 6, you're going to analyze all homes directly competing with the subject home. So again, like step 1 and 2, you're going to pull all of that same information, but you're going to do this with active listings. So now you'll be able to use that same criteria, run it through with active properties. This is great about seeing the competition and what it's doing. And it allows for the sellers to see what the competition is pricing and also where they should price. So it's a really great opportunity to leverage that as well. And then determining entry points. So note, if you're looking for resistance, this is 2 or 3 similar or better homes listed to equal or lower prices. So this step also helps determine if sellers should enter the marketplace. You don't want to overwhelm your clients with like a long CMA, something that's like 40 pages or more, that includes bar graphs and multiple pictures. I know that that can get mundane. And it also is kind of a typical agent approach as well. You don't want this process to be mind numbing. You want to just give them specific examples, kind of keep it short and to the point so they can get more. Sorry, I was reading the chat. So
yeah, me too.
I just want to make sure I'm not missing questions.
Wait, what was that last question? It says, so you don't show active? Was that what the question?
So you don't show.
It
Yes.
says, so wait a second, where is it? It disappeared on
So
me.
you don't show any active pricing until after getting a yes on possible pricing. Yeah, you want to kind of fill your sellers out within the conversation, or at least that's what the strategy teaches. Obviously, you want to do what makes you comfortable though as well. But if you kind of test and gauge where they think they should fall, and then bring in your active with the competition, then again, it allows them to just understand where they need to fall within those ranges. So it kind of leverages you a little bit more doing it that way. Does
And
that
the
make
point,
sense?
yes, exactly. And also the point we want to make with these classes is there is no specific, perfect process. You have to make it your own. And so, but the overall concept is what's important. So you're taking the comps, you're putting them into a summary sheet, which we're going to get into. It keeps it simple and clean for the seller to understand. And it allows the seller to insert themselves into the range, both on the sold summary page and on the active summary page. And that way you have what is proven, because the sold properties are the proven ones, and then what is active, which is what they'll be currently competing against, and you can show them what happens based upon where they enter the market. So I know we'll go over that a little bit, but I thought it was worthwhile to just say that none of these classes, when we get into scripts especially, the scripts have to be yours. They have to be something you're comfortable with, and what one person might feel comfortable saying, another might not. So, but it's the little things, like Jason said, the little wording, like homes sell for 2 reasons, pricing and exposure. And well, I did want to mention these expired because these properties are what the market rejected. It's the little things like that that differentiate you. And if you can differentiate yourself, then you create value, because in the absence of value, the only thing people go to is price. And that means your commission. That's what we want to avoid. We want to be different than all the people that we're competing with.
Hey, the other thing that happens when you do it this way, there's something psychological that happens to the seller, because where do sellers always want to start? They want to start with actives. Exactly what you said, where's the actives? Because that's what they're comparing everything to. Rarely do they actually even have sold information or expired information.
Well,
So
it's also what they're seeing too. They're pulling it up online and everything. That's
right. So in their mind, they think that's the value of these homes. If their neighbor is listed at 400, even if it's truly only worth 300, in their mind, it's, the comp is 400 because it's active. So starting with solds allows you to show them what's worked. Then you go to the expireds and you use the word that rejected. And then I love and we haven't talked about it, but Jeff, you always talk about using the word, these are the dreamers. These are the ones that are hoping to sell. They're on the market. They haven't sold yet. And so these are the ones that are hoping to sell. And then you can go back and utilize your solds and your expireds. You can even go through with them one-on-one and say, this one right here, this is a real dreamer. Looking at these expireds, it looks like they may not sell, but here's one that's closed. This home here seems like it's positioned to maybe be the next one to sell.
Exactly.
So that's where those actives come in, and we're gonna get to this here in a second, but it's gonna be based on some of their timing of where they enter that. If they're okay with 1 or 2 homes selling before they do, or do they need to price appropriately and make sure that they're better priced than what's active? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That's huge.
So instead, you want to distinguish yourself by presenting a unique, understandable, and complete set of pricing tools that revolve around crucial pricing considerations and allow for complete self-discovery with the sellers. That's what you're creating, doing all of those 7 steps. Step 7, you're going to determine the most appropriate price entry point based on the timing needs. So remember that people will follow what you can logically and tangibly explain. That's a belief in our belief list. So if you're able to lead your sellers through all of these 7 steps and position them accordingly, then at the end of step 7, your sellers should be giving you a range that is appropriate and makes sense. So some things that we're going to summarize, because we're going to get into a lot of the dialogue after we go through our action items at the end of this class. You guys will have a little bit of time to do those, and then part 2 we'll go over those and we'll we'll talk about how to use it and get into that dialogue. But something that I want to summarize is, remember that price should never exceed value, as this would indicate the seller is using needs and or wants as justification for why buyers should pay an overvalued price. Buyers seldom, if ever, pay over market value for a home. If price exceeds value and cannot be justified beyond the seller's needs and wants, then recommend the seller wait to list the home. Again, if you're dealing with stubborn people, sometimes that win-win can't be generated if you are going through all of these logical steps and they're still being very stubborn with you. So some action items for this session. So like I said, I attached at the beginning of this class within our chat, there is a pricing bootcamp action items. I can't remember exactly what I called it, but it should be in there. But you're going to complete these action items by pulling comps the same way, usually using the same 7-step pricing strategy for a residential waterfront property and a condo. Also, you can do a minimum of active and sold summary sheets if you want, but you can also include the expired summary sheets as this class teaches. And I highly encourage everybody to kind of do all 3 if they have the time.
Hey, Kaylin, can we talk a little bit more specifically about this exercise?
Yeah, no, I was going to let you do that.
Okay, cool. Keep going then.
After I said that we'll also go over the results and have everybody kind of take turns going over how they price things and kind of why they justified the way that they justified, along with that dialogue. And that'll be next Wednesday, April 1st at the same time at 1 o'clock. Now you can go ahead, Jeff.
Now I'm gone. Okay, so there are, there's so many variables in our market today. Jason alluded, I mean, our market at the lake, not only today, but at the lake in general. Jason alluded to one of those. Oftentimes, or at all times at the Lake of the Ozarks, there's lots of properties on the market. There may only be a certain segment of those properties in the market. And so, defining what is out there versus what is really selling comes from your solds versus your active summary page. So all we're asking to do, and we want to create an exercise. We wanted to create an exercise where you all could take information on hypothetical properties, 1 waterfront home and 1 condo, and then you could use the current solds and the current actives to develop summary pages from those, and your opinion of where that property fits within those summary pages on both properties. And we've kind of set it up so you can, we can read this first one. The first one we're talking about is a waterfront home. You look at the property information. This waterfront home is 3,200 square feet. The sellers would like to sell that thing within 3 to 6 months. It's 10 years old. Gentle topography. Boy, that's an interesting one at the lake. It's in the middle of a wide cove, and the cove has deep water. It has a 2-well dock, swim platform. You can see that. You can see the features: 4-bed, 3-bath, granite kitchen. I'm pretty sure we would all like this as a listing, and this would be a highly sought after listing. So the challenge is, what comps are really comps? What do our sold comps look like? And where does that fit in the summary page within the sold comps as well as within the actives? So this is going to be an interesting one because, back to what Brian said at the beginning, there are properties that are rarer than others. So we're going to do this exercise ourselves, and that way we'll be able to visit about those summary sheets when we're done to see what our ranges are, what we use to compare with them, both solds and actives. The other one's a condo. A condo's like a little city. I love that about condos because, my condo and your condo can't be as far apart as my house and your house. Although there are certain features about condominiums that cause them to bring more or less. And so you can kind of see what this is. now your job is to go out, see what the actives would be, put a summary sheet together, see what the solds would be, put a summary sheet together, and then next Wednesday we'll visit about this. Are you guys, do you have questions about the exercise? Do you have anything else you want to add?
I wanted to show you guys kind of what these pricing template tools look like as well. So you can kind of see there's tabs at the bottom. I don't know if you can see my screen, but I hope so.
Yes, we can.
And then you have just waterfront homes and condos, and it gives you all the tabs that you need, and you can change these to however you want to segregate that information. So that's what those look like.
Kaylin, when you're really putting this into practice, and I've tried it, I used to go in with a pile of comps.
Mhm.
It was the same information, but literally when I would lay it out on their table and I would start sorting through the solds and the actives, and people wanted to talk about the actives and I'm still trying to talk about the solds, and all of a sudden there is a mess of information. And some of that can be caused even by a beautiful prepackaged matrix CMA. I love them, they're pretty, but they can cause, sometimes if they're done wrong, they can cause a lot of confusion. The one thing about the summary sheet method, it does take some work, but how much is that, how much is that period of time worth? And the more focused you can keep them, because everybody knows that, with the wrong, with comps, you can do a lot with them. The more focused you can keep them on a sheet like this, I think the clearer that conversation is. It worked really well.
Do you take comps or do you just take the summary sheet?
I take the backup support because there are questions that come up, Brian, but I don't lay it all out. I try to work off the summary sheets and limit the number of mess that I create on the table. And that has worked better. But when I have to defend or go to a certain house because of the way it looked or what it had, then I have that supporting data with me.
Good idea. Thanks.
Hey, a couple things that you touched on, Jeff. One of the things that obviously this takes some time, but how much is a listing conversation worth? When you're talking about dollar producing activities, outside of going to a closing and picking up a check, there's not many activities that are more dollar producing than going to a listing conversation. And so it always amazes me whenever we kind of poo-poo the idea that we need to put some time into the listing and getting ready for this conversation. So just think about that. I love what, Mel used to give the example. She would actually write herself a check of what that commission would be. If she sold that house, she would put it in her seat to remind her of how much that stinking listing was worth.
You know why she did that?
Enough is for you. Maybe it's, maybe you're doing it to take a vacation or whatever it is. You got to remember your why, but this is why we do what we do. So it's a really important factor. The other thing you touched on, Jeff, I love this, and you just I want to make sure that people write this down. Steal as much as you can from Jeff because he's really good. But what he said, when you're talking about actives, Jeff often uses the phrase, there's a lot of homes on the market, but there's not very many in the market. And so as people give you objections to actives, I always felt like that is an awesome line. That there's lots of homes on the market, there's not very many in the market. Just felt like that was, you said that, but you said it so fast. I wanted everybody to steal it from you.
I love it. Does anybody have any questions before we end this session? And like I said, again, we will pick this back up next Wednesday, same time for part 2.
Are we doing it online again?
Yeah, same.
Okay.
Same,
Same bat channel, same bat place.
Actually,
Gotcha.
there's a different invite for part 2, but it's
Okay.
in the events, and then I will shoot it out again as we get closer to that.
Hey, Brian, we're gonna do more of the Zoom stuff because it's we can all do it from wherever we're at, and allows us to interact with each other. And we're going to up our level of communication, not lessen it during these interesting times that we're dealing with. And we're going to try to make sure that wherever we're at, that we're focused on the right things and that we're still working our business, because the beauty of this business is there is a lot that we can do. If it's nothing more than training and sharpening our pencil and then communicating with our database to let them know that we care, you know, forget about being the salesperson to your database right now, and just be the one that calls and checks on them. That's where the value is today. And we're going to do more and more of that, hopefully in different ways, like this Zoom deal, and, you know,
Cool.
be able to stay together.
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Kaylin, you did an
Appreciate you
awesome
guys.
job. This is really cool. Thanks for setting it up.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Pay attention to the chat. I did throw my email address out there in case anybody does have specific questions or needs those files. Feel free to email me anytime.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.